This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Hey folks, Rob McNealy here, and today we're going to have a good show because we are talking to the CEO and founder of LBRY, Jeremy Kauffman, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. And I'm actually kind of like schoolgirl giddy about this because I love their platform. So, Jeremy, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am doing well, and I'm also excited to be here.
Well, good. Well, thank you. I know we've chatted a little bit on social media over the last few months, and you guys have been very helpful in onboarding me to your platform, and I really do appreciate that. And I can tell you, and you're not paying me for this, just so you know, everybody out there, full disclosure, I am literally a fanboy. I'm not even trying to build up my YouTube anymore. I just find that YouTube's a waste. It's a waste of time for me as a creator on that side of it. It's not worth me putting the energy into building up a YouTube following anymore. I'm putting all my energy into building a library following, not only because of the demonetization of YouTube, but the fact is that I deal with controversial subjects that, the people that run YouTube don't like. And so I think there's too great of a risk long-term building on that platform at this point, and I'm putting my energies in the library. So Jeremy, tell me about you, and then tell me about LBRY.
First I just want to say that's awesome to hear. YouTube has definitely become very corporate. They're basically cable news now, and LBRY, we think, is a big part of the answer to that. If I introduce LBRY to a super, in the super normal way, I might call it something like, oh, it's just, LBRY TV is, it's just YouTube with better policy. But ultimately what we're doing is much, much more ambitious than that. You just can't always express that ambition in a single sentence. Since your audience is nerdy, maybe I can, we're trying to build a decentralized digital content marketplace. The idea is to make services like YouTube possible, but to do it entirely via open technology, to do it in a way that's not owned or controlled by any one entity, just like the Bitcoin network or any other public blockchain network is. And so I think that idea is really powerful. And I think it's part of why we will ultimately succeed, because it's different in a fundamental way. Like if I started another video platform and it was just YouTube with better policy, well, who else had a better policy than YouTube? YouTube did 10 years ago, right? When you're the underdog, you're super nice. And then when you've won, you become a big jerk, right? That is the pattern of Silicon Valley, right? And I haven't talked about myself much, but this is not my first venture. I have been in the software industry for some time and have built a much more traditional SaaS company before starting this company and working on this one. But I'm much, much more motivated to work on this one because I think what we're doing is so important.
So tell me a little bit about your structure. How are you governed? And are you a company, a foundation? Are you decentralized? How does LBRY function and govern itself?
In a pretty boring way. We're actually so there is a separate LBRY foundation to be that nonprofit and have that set of incentives and be community run. LBRY Inc., which is the company that originally created the LBRY technology, is a pretty boring Delaware C Corp traditional corporation. All of the corporation is almost entirely owned by people who work here. So I will say that's different. LBRY did get a little bit of VC funding, but the VC has all investors in aggregate have a substantially minority stake in the company. So the company is effectively owned by the people who work here, right? So it's we function like a traditional corporation. There's a board of directors. The board of directors elects the CEO, which is me. I am also on the board. and then I run the company. Now, what's different is that what the company produces is all completely open technology. It's all open source. It's all open documentation. And there's the key difference in terms of what we end up building is this ability to leave, this ability to essentially to exit, to change the rules with which you're governed by. And I think this is the key component in systems that actually prevents them from sort of going downhill. And that's email would be an example of a system that is interoperable and not owned by any one entity. And this means that one company, even though Gmail has cornered has a lot of the email market, I wouldn't say they're cornered because you can't really. They don't have that same potential that a Facebook does or a YouTube does, where once they've gotten a certain segment of the market, they can now, start squeezing you and start taking advantage of you. We don't see this nearly as much with email as we do with large social media platforms, where all of a sudden bad policy, right? Like Gmail has never, Google would never consider you're filtering emails out of your inbox without your permission, but they'll filter videos because they can, and that becomes profitable for them to do that. So that's what we want to do. We want to turn video distribution, digital content publishing, not just videos, into something that is, I know it's not the sexiest word, but we want it to be a little bit more email-like in terms of not being locked into one piece of software, not being locked into one way of doing things.
So what prevents you, devil's advocate, and I'm genuinely curious, what prevents LBRY from growing, and you guys have been growing exponentially, especially in the last 6 months, at least what I've seen. What prevents you from being the big YouTube in the future and turning into a bad guy? What have you put in place to, try to make it so that doesn't happen? How do you mitigate that risk?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would in general be skeptical, ask hard questions. We want this stuff to stand up to scrutiny because that's how we know that it works. And so there's a key distinction, and this is actually something we're working on. We had a blog post out about this, about how we're going to be straightening out and changing some of the naming of some of these things. So there's LBRY.TV. LBRY.TV is like Coinbase, right? It is not a fully decentralized experience. It's interacting with the decentralized network, right? Coinbase interacts with a bunch of different decentralized networks, but Coinbase itself is not decentralized. Coinbase is Coinbase. It's a company. You're interacting with Coinbase. Though we are currently providing both the Coinbase experience, and we've built the software that powers the Bitcoin experience, right? When I say the Bitcoin experience, I mean, you can use it locally, you can use peer-to-peer version, you can use a desktop client. So that client is always going to be completely up to the users how they want to use it. There will never be something at that level where there's censorship, network wide or anything like that. You will have the ability to use that software locally, configure it. Now, you have to, you should still follow the law, right? You still have an obligation to use that software legally. But that software will not be controlled by us, will not be censored by us. That interacts with a peer-to-peer decentralized network. And so that will always be there. That level will always exist and really can't be interfered with. The web versions are going to have to set policies, right? It's not as simple as it's both not legal, nor as simple as just try to serve everything as much as possible, right? And so our goal with the web experience is to provide something that works for large numbers of people. If that ever means some people that experience doesn't work for them, there's an ability to have both a multitude of web experiences. So if Gmail stops working for you, you go to Proton Mail, you go to Hotmail, whatever, you go to whoever else you want to go to. And so we expect the same thing to happen with any web experiences that we provide. Ultimately, that following that you're building up, all of that is not owned and controlled by the company. So you can take your wallet out and go take your wallet and go put it into another service or go use your wallet locally, at which point we don't have that level of influence or control over you. So that's a huge check. There's no, if you stop liking Facebook or you stop liking Twitter's policy, there's no ability to all of a sudden all of your friends are on Facebook too with better policy. Whereas in the LBRY design of things, that's all possible.
So what kind of drove you to do this? You guys have been around since 2015?
Yeah, the first work began in 2015. The company, I don't believe technically existed in 2015. The no one was the first sort of like full-time real work began uh, mid 2016 and onward, shortly after the blockchain launched. We basically launched the blockchain in 2016 and did some fundraising actually after that. When we were very we did no ICO and no real fundraising until after we put the blockchain up. And
We didn't either.
yeah, nice, excellent. Yeah. I don't know, actually, potentially a strategic mistake. Who knows? But honestly, the reason it all went this way and is like, you know, to me, if I have a certain itch when it comes to building something, it's just like really, really hard for me not to scratch it. And so I was working at another company where it also sort of built that company up, and it's another software product, much more boring than this one. And that company was doing decently, but I just couldn't stop thinking about this idea. I am a computer scientist by education, and I was learning and going into blockchain and thinking about how it works and thinking about other technical systems and like what's different about blockchain and how could it be used. And I just couldn't stop thinking about this idea of building using a public blockchain to serve as a registry of content that exists. It's why the company is called LBRY. And I'll continue to make unsexy metaphors and references here, you know, like we wanted it to be something like the old card catalog, right? Everything except but for everything, right? Can we use a public blockchain, this permissionless system, to keep a register of stuff that exists? Because we already had good peer-to-peer tech, like BitTorrent works. BitTorrent's censorship resistant. BitTorrent user experience sucks. BitTorrent is not great for creators, but as a peer-to-peer tech, BitTorrent's amazing, and it's elegant and it's well-designed and all these things. And so really the core idea, we did several things on top of this and afterwards, but the core idea was a public blockchain could solve some of these problems with BitTorrent around indexing, identity, payment.
Sure. Compliance is a big deal, and the censorship is a big deal. It's all the rage right now, right? Especially in Silicon Valley. They just seem to like want to wield that hammer.
Yeah.
How is censorship and how's bad content, for instance, or maybe potentially illegal content dealt with on your platform?
Yeah. So this is a great example of some of the things that we were talking about before, and those answers can be slightly different, right? Content is illegal. There are strict things you have to do, and we follow all the laws, and I'll talk about specifically what we do. There's also content that could be damaging to a brand, or that people may just not want to be associated with, right? And how you deal with that stuff can actually, that's also very tricky, right? In fact, all the debates with YouTube, right? It's generally not around illegal content. Everyone think, you know, right? It's generally around stuff that's legal but debatable to certain populations. So let me give the full answer on like the illegal stuff, and then if we want to talk about the legal but debatable stuff, we can talk about that as well. On the illegal stuff, we are a registered agent with the federal government, United States government, and so when we receive DMCA, I assume we're mostly talking about DMCAs, but for other illegal stuff, it'd be a similar process. But basically, we receive complaints, we validate the complaints. If it's illegal, we maintain a list of essentially hashes that are known to be illegal, and then those hashes are circulated to other operators in the network who choose to, if they want to use the software illegally, choose to respect those lists. This basically comes down to your wallet server when you're using the desktop client. So your desktop client by default connects to wallet servers that we run, which are then going to listen to our blacklists. And we encourage all wallet server operators to obey the blacklists. But if you're in a country where those blacklists don't apply or whatever, you could run a wallet server and then not listen to those blacklists and return whatever metadata or data you wanted to return. So basically, we provide those lists as a service and circulate them so that operators can can follow and listen to them. And of course, all of the websites that we run and everything that we run obeys those blacklists.
So that kind of almost voluntary kind of methodology, is that, I guess it sounds like it's compliant with US regulations. And like, have you had any pushback from the government on that?
We haven't had any pushback from the government yet. I'm sure, I'm guessing you and your audience will appreciate that, the nature of the law is frequently that there is no clear answer, and ultimately you find out in court. So, we're trying very much to follow the law. I pay lawyers amounts of money that I really don't like paying them for them to tell me, well, this is probably how you follow the law, but we don't really know. I mean, because you don't know. You don't know. Sometimes the cases are so ambiguous, they go all the way to the Supreme Court, right? You have cases like the Grokster case or the Aereo case are two examples of case law that come up when, when both I or the lawyers attempt to do research on this. And, these cases made it all the way to the Supreme Court because it was unclear, right? And so we think very much that what we're doing follows the law. However, like a real challenge, like it would have to go probably through some layers of court, because you've got a bunch of laws that aren't written with decentralized networks in mind. They're written with a traditional sort of client-server model in mind. So when they're using some of these terms, what do they mean? Who is responsible? Like for an example, I'm not trying to, I hope the federal government isn't listening to your show. I think the federal government could argue that every person mining on the Bitcoin network is violating money transmission laws. I'm not saying that this argument would hold up. I have no idea what the courts would say, right? I think it probably wouldn't work, but I think you could plausibly argue it. And if the government decided to argue it, it would have to go all the way to the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
So
I mean,
that's the unfortunate answer.
Well, it's interesting, because we're a project as well, and it's like we've done things that are gray. Like we do everything. We as a project have done everything to avoid regulatory risk, right? We're not out there thumbing our nose at the government and things like that. We want to focus on lawful markets and things like that, and do really good things, right? But there's still some like basically areas where the guidance from the SEC doesn't apply to things that we've done. Like just doesn't cover it. Like they don't address it. And so that's when I always say it's gray, because no one's determined or tested the theory legally one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, it's awful. It's awful. I mean, in the case of the SEC stuff, it's like, I'll give you an example of like, there's no you can't get any proactive assessment, right? You can't spend any amount of money for the SEC. It's not like, oh, you okay? It's not, and I'm talking about like, you can't pay, hey, $100,000 SEC, go please tell me what the legal status of this is in your judgment. You can't do that. All you can do is operate, and then one day they may or may not come and ask you questions. That's the way it works. And in terms of some of the SEC stuff around our token securities, the SEC has said this: Ethereum was a security when it started. Right? That's what they said. Security when it started. It's not a security today. Right? Okay.
Right.
Logically speaking, something that started as a security and is not a security now had to at one point transition from one state to the other. Right? You can't go from, okay, when did it happen? Well, we're not going to tell you. Right? So they're saying that at some point between the founding of Ethereum, because they have no precise criteria. They don't have it. What they do is they write laws so that they're incredibly vague, and then there's a bunch of discretion that's left up to the people. And so we have no idea what tokens are securities or not. I mean, there have been very, very few cases that have actually, even happened. For the most part, the ones that the SEC has chosen to do a case on have been the ones that were like very, pretty, very clearly a security. So there's a whole bunch. There is a whole wide swath here where we have no idea what's legal and what's not.
Yeah, and it comes back down to is that there's always that hammer hanging over your head, right? And it's like, I choose to ignore the hammer because I want to be able to function and work hard on our project. But there's always that little gray thing like, oh yeah, if someone really wanted to be a jerk, they could, cost you a lot of money going to court. Ultimately.
I hate it. Honestly, it's something it's like a real, it's something I'm actually pretty passionate about, because I think it's sad and it holds back a lot of things. It means that you have to be like I'm a risk tolerant person. Like I'm very comfortable with risk. And it means that you're basically like, you're restricting like only weird people like me are going to do some of this interesting work, right? Yeah. Yeah. But there are lots of people who are like really smart people who are not as risk tolerant maybe as you or I are, and they're not going to enter this space, and they're not going to do interesting things. And that's sad. Like that there's no, like, cause I could have in 2016 described for you exactly what LBRY is, what the network is going to do, how's it going to work. And like, it would be nice to be told, even at some expense, even if it's several $100,000, even if it's $1 million or more, can you tell me, like, before we spend way more than $1 million, like, is this allowed or not? Like, is this the right way to do it? How do I do this so that it's legal? You can't do that. All you can do is spend, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of hours of human effort have been put into the LBRY project at this point. And I fully expect it to be legal. I want to be clear. I don't think it's like some 50-50 thing, but I don't think it's literally zero. Like, I don't think it's zero. Cause I would have said there's no way that Aereo, which is this antenna case in New York City, I said, there's no way Aereo is going to lose the Supreme Court case. Aereo is definitely legal. And then the Supreme Court made up a law, made up a rule to say that Aereo is not legal. And we can talk about that case if you want to get into it, but it's like, so you never know.
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate, but I mean, even if you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorneys, you might get something called a SAFT, and then you try to call it a utility token, and we know how most of that's ended up already. So
no, I'm
it's
saying like I should be able to pay the government. Like,
right.
I should be able to pay, like, if you're willing to investigate people on your own dime, SEC, like, let me pay you to get a proactive judgment. Like, even if the sticker fee is really high, like, you should be able to get a proactive judgment from courts before you, like, to say that, like, the only way we can tell if a technology is going to be legal or not is to build it, and only after you've built it to dispute it. It's just crazy. Like, why can't we have some more proactive way of getting some of these judgments? It's just incredibly inefficient. Like, Aereo, a bunch of people spent their multiple years of their lives building up a company, and then the Supreme Court says you can't do it. I mean, why couldn't the Supreme Court, like, why couldn't there, even if it's, $10 million, $100 million, Aereo probably spent hundreds of millions of dollars before they were shut down. So you never, it's just dumb.
Well, what were the circumstances in that case?
The Aereo case is the one. So I love this case. So it's like a rebroadcasting thing. So Aereo did antennas in New York City. So they would, on your behalf, buy you personally an antenna. So you would own an antenna in New York City, your antenna, one antenna per customer, a discrete antenna. That antenna was yours, and then they would rebroadcast the output of it over the internet to you. Okay, so you could basically get New York City over-the-air television anywhere in the US by buying an antenna and letting Aereo host it for you. Now, the Supreme Court said that because users interact with this service as if it were a cable company, it therefore is a cable company. So they said that this makes Aereo a cable company. In the same ruling, they said that it would be completely legal for me to go on to Craigslist and post and say, hey, will you put an antenna in your house for me and hook it up in this way? I'll pay you $100, right? That's legal. So I can still hire someone to do this exact service. If a company tries to proactively do it, they basically said that makes you a cable company because users think that you are one, therefore you are one and you're governed by cable company law. Like, nothing in the cable company law says this. Like, they basically made it, as far as I can tell, I mean, they didn't literally make it up. They come up with a chain of logic. But I think it's like utterly crazy to say that, like, what makes something a cable company is whether people perceive it as one. They're not a cable company. They're not running cables through the line. They're taking they're taking something over the air, and so it's like to me, if you want to be part of a society, is you need to have like laws with clear meaning. And I think that we have a lot of laws that basically end up with these very vague meanings, and so you never know how they'll actually be interpreted until they're interpreted.
So where do you see the future of LBRY? What would you say your main goal with LBRY is at this point? You guys are humming along. You guys have millions of users on your platform now. Where would you like to see LBRY over the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think we're close to. I think we will absolutely be cementing ourselves as the 1 alternative to YouTube, and then soon YouTube will be the #1 alternative to LBRY. I think I want to grow beyond video. I think we're going to beat YouTube. I'm not saying it's like easy, like we've won or something, but we're gonna be YouTube. I mean, YouTube's done. Like, there's just like everything about the way that Google works as a company, all of their policy actions. It's like, if I were observing the way that, well, I guess I kind of am observing them from the outside because I don't work there. Like, it's seriously like someone in my company is like paying them or has like blackmail on them. Like, they're our best friends, right? They're literally helping us succeed, and everything they're doing is just driving people over to LBRY. And I think that what we're doing is so fundamentally different that they can't adopt it. That's really important, by the way, in terms of success in business. You know, like, one of the reasons that underdogs frequently don't win is the established, the overdog, whatever, can just co-opt, right? It's the same reason that third parties don't win in politics a lot of the time, is that if a third party has a really good wedge issue, well, just one of the major parties will just adopt the wedge issue, right? And so same kind of thing. But in this case, our whole competitive advantage is tying our own hands. And so it's like YouTube, you know, and when your competitive advantage is so fundamentally different, companies tend to not adopt it. Like, YouTube would have to blow up their entire business to defeat us, and I just don't see them doing it. What I want to do is I want to begin pressing into different areas. Like, right now, everything's been LBRY. It's been all one single multi-purpose app. That's not the way we ultimately experience media. We use one app for podcasts. We use another app for news. We use another app for video. And even then, for video, we might use a different app for user-generated content versus for, more corporate content. And there's even other things. There's CAD files. There's comic books. You know, there's all kinds of even niche digital media. And ultimately, I think LBRY can disrupt any number of these spaces. And so I want to start looking at forming partnerships, business development deals with other entities that could adapt the LBRY technology and begin disrupting some of these other verticals as well.
I might have someone I want to introduce you to off the air that might actually be beneficial.
Yeah.
So I know you're trying to press for time today. So real quick, where can people find out more about you and LBRY, and how can they get started on the LBRY platform? Yeah.
So the number one thing I would say, you can ignore everything else after this, although I'll say a bunch more things. Go to lbry.tv, create an account, follow me, follow Rob, and follow some other creators on there. There's lots of great YouTubers making their way over. There's lots of great original stuff, and just start there. If you're a creator yourself and you're on YouTube, you're not safe. At a minimum, use lbry.com/YouTube to copy everything over. We are on basically every social site. I would say we're the most active on Twitter, but we're also on Facebook and everything else. We have a Reddit, and you can find all of those. Just type them in. I won't say all the links. And if you want to follow me personally, probably Twitter is the best. My handle is my full name, Jeremy Kauffman.
Jeremy, thank you so much. I've enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thanks, Rob.
You have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.